The Eilean Mòr Lighthouse Mystery Nobody Solved. Part 1. The island where 3 men vanished. Picture this for a second. You're standing completely alone on a tiny island in the middle of the North Atlantic. Massive waves slam into towering cliffs below you. The wind is so powerful that it drowns out your own voice. As the sun disappears beneath the horizon, darkness slowly swallows the island. In the middle of all that chaos, there's only one sign of life: a lighthouse. For every ship crossing these dangerous waters, that light means survival. But what if the light keeps shining, while the 3 men responsible for keeping it alive simply disappear? No distress call, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, just an empty lighthouse overlooking one of the roughest seas on Earth. More than 125 years later, nobody knows exactly what happened. This is the true story of the Eilean Mòr Lighthouse Mystery, one of the greatest unsolved disappearances in maritime history. Our story begins in December of 1900. Far off the west coast of Scotland lies a remote chain of rocky islands known as the Flannan Islands. There are 7 islands in total, surrounded by cold Atlantic waters and steep sea cliffs that make landing difficult even on a calm day. No permanent community ever lived there. Occasionally, shepherds brought sheep to graze during the summer months, but they rarely stayed overnight. Over time, stories and local legends surrounded the islands. Some believed strange sounds echoed across the cliffs after sunset. Others claimed the islands carried an eerie feeling that was impossible to explain. Whether those stories were true or not, one thing was certain. The sea surrounding the Flannan Islands was incredibly dangerous. By the late 19th century, more and more ships were using this route. Heavy fog, hidden rocks, violent storms, and towering waves turned the area into a nightmare for sailors. Shipwrecks became a growing concern. To make these waters safer, authorities decided to build a lighthouse on the largest island, Eilean Mòr. Construction was difficult. Every piece of stone, every beam of timber, and every piece of machinery had to be transported across unpredictable seas. After months of hard work, the lighthouse officially entered service in late 1899. Its mission was simple: keep the light burning, guide ships safely through the darkness, and never leave the station unattended. 3 lighthouse keepers worked on rotating shifts, while a 4th keeper remained on standby on the mainland to provide relief when needed. In December 1900, the men assigned to Eilean Mòr were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur. James Ducat was the principal keeper. Calm, disciplined, and highly respected, he had spent years working in lighthouses and was known for following procedures with absolute precision. Thomas Marshall served as the 2nd assistant keeper. He carefully recorded daily weather conditions, sea states, and maintenance work in the station logbook. His attention to detail would later become extremely important. The 3rd man, Donald McArthur, was serving as a temporary replacement. Unlike the other 2, he wasn't a full-time lighthouse keeper. He had been assigned to cover another keeper's absence. Those who knew him described him as strong-willed and fearless, especially during dangerous situations. For the first few weeks, everything appeared perfectly normal. The lighthouse lamp was lit every evening. Equipment inspections were completed on schedule. Daily observations were recorded. Signals were sent as expected. Nothing suggested that anything was wrong. Then, without warning, something changed. In the middle of December, several passing ships reported that the lighthouse light either appeared to be missing or wasn't visible when expected. At first, many assumed the poor weather was simply hiding the beam. But when similar reports continued to arrive, concern began to grow. The problem was that the Atlantic had become so violent that supply vessels couldn't reach the island for several days. No one on the mainland had any way of knowing what was happening on Eilean Mòr. Had the keepers suffered an accident? Were they trapped inside the lighthouse? Or had something far more mysterious taken place? Finally, after days of relentless storms, the weather eased just enough for a supply ship to make the journey. The crew had no idea that they were about to walk into one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in history. And the moment they stepped onto Eilean Mòr, everything changed. The Eilean Mòr Lighthouse Mystery Nobody Solved. Part 2. An Empty Lighthouse. On December 26, 1900, the relief vessel Hesperus finally reached Eilean Mòr after several days of rough seas. The delay wasn't unusual. Winter storms in the North Atlantic could make landing on the island nearly impossible, but this time, something felt different long before anyone stepped ashore. As the ship approached the island, Captain James Harvey noticed something strange. Normally, one of the lighthouse keepers would be waiting at the landing place, ready to help unload supplies. It was standard procedure. This time, no one was there. The ship sounded its horn. Once. Then again. Still nothing. No figure appeared on the cliffs. No voice answered from above. The only sound was the wind crashing against the rocks. One crew member, Joseph Moore, was sent ashore to investigate. As he climbed the steep stone path leading toward the lighthouse, an uncomfortable silence surrounded him. Everything looked normal. The lighthouse itself stood exactly where it should. The buildings were undamaged. Nothing suggested a disaster had taken place. But the silence felt wrong. When Mòr reached the entrance, he found the main gate closed but unlocked. He stepped inside and immediately realized something wasn't right. The rooms were empty. Not temporarily empty. Completely abandoned. There wasn't a single lighthouse keeper anywhere inside the station. The beds had been slept in. Some everyday items remained exactly where they had been left. A chair had been moved away from the table. The kitchen showed signs that normal daily life had suddenly stopped. Most importantly, the three men were nowhere to be found. Mòr searched every room. He called out each man's name. There was no response. He checked the lighthouse tower itself. The great lamp was still there, waiting to be maintained. But there was no one left to tend it. As more members of the crew joined the search, they began examining the station more carefully. One detail immediately caught their attention. The large oilskin coats normally worn during dangerous weather were hanging inside the building. Almost all of them. Only one appeared to be missing. That was unusual. Stepping outside during a winter Atlantic storm without proper protective clothing would have been extremely risky. Even experienced lighthouse keepers wouldn't normally do that. Unless they believed they would only be outside for a moment, or they were responding to an emergency. The crew continued searching around the island. They checked every path, every cliff edge, every nearby shelter. Nothing. No footprints. No equipment. No bodies. No sign that three grown men had ever left the island. It was as though they had simply disappeared. Captain Harvey immediately reported the situation to the Northern Lighthouse Board. An official investigation began. The first person assigned to examine the evidence was Robert Muirhead, a superintendent who had personally known the lighthouse keepers. He traveled to Eilean Mòr, determined to understand what had happened. As he inspected the station, he found no signs of violence. Nothing had been stolen. There were no broken windows, no blood, no evidence of a fight. Inside, everything suggested the men had been carrying out their normal duties until shortly before they vanished. Then Muirhead turned his attention to the official lighthouse logbook. The entries covering the final days immediately stood out. Thomas Marshall had carefully recorded the weather and daily operations as he always did. Some entries described unusually severe winds. One note suggested that Donald McArthur, known by friends as a tough, fearless man, had seemed unusually quiet during the storm. Another entry mentioned that James Ducat had been praying. And then came one of the final recorded lines. "The storm has ended. Sea calm. God is over all." Soon after that, the logbook ended. No more entries were ever written. For decades, those final notes became one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the case. Many people wondered why experienced lighthouse keepers would write about terrifying storms when weather records from nearby locations suggested conditions may not have been as severe on those exact dates. Some researchers later questioned whether parts of the popular story about the logbook had been exaggerated over time or even misreported in newspapers. Unfortunately, because the original logbook pages are no longer available for independent examination, historians continue to debate exactly what was written and how reliable those famous quotations really are. But one fact has never been disputed. The three lighthouse keepers disappeared. None of them ever returned. No bodies were recovered. No confirmed witness ever saw them again. As investigators expanded their search beyond the lighthouse, they discovered something that shifted the entire direction of the investigation. The western landing area of the island showed signs of incredible storm damage. Heavy storage boxes had been thrown from their positions. Iron railings had been twisted. Equipment normally secured high above sea level had been scattered across the rocks. It looked as though an enormous force had struck the island. The question was, could a single wave really have been powerful enough to erase three experienced men without leaving a trace? Or was there still another piece of the puzzle waiting to be discovered? That question would shape every theory that followed. The Eilean Mòr Lighthouse Mystery Nobody Solved. Part 3. The Theories That Refused to Die. When investigators finished examining the lighthouse and the damaged western landing, they were left with one frustrating reality. There was no definitive evidence explaining what had happened to James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur. No eyewitnesses. No bodies. No final message. Only theories. The official explanation, accepted by the Northern Lighthouse Board, was that the three men had likely gone outside to secure equipment near the western landing during extremely dangerous weather. According to this theory, powerful Atlantic waves had already damaged ropes, storage boxes, and lifting gear. The keepers may have noticed the damage and rushed outside to prevent more equipment from being swept into the sea. Perhaps one man went down first. A second followed to help. Then the third broke one of the most important lighthouse rules by leaving the station unattended so he could assist the others. At that moment, investigators believed an enormous rogue wave struck the cliffs. Unlike ordinary waves, rogue waves are unpredictable walls of water that can appear suddenly, even when surrounding waves seem manageable. Modern oceanography has confirmed that these rare waves do exist and can reach extraordinary heights under the right conditions. If the keepers had been standing near the cliff edge, they would have had almost no chance of surviving. The sea would have carried them away within seconds. It sounds reasonable. In fact, many historians still believe this is the most likely explanation. But the mystery doesn't end there. Critics of the official theory point out several unanswered questions. If the weather was dangerous enough to send 3 experienced keepers outside together, why wasn't one man left inside to maintain the lighthouse? Why would they risk leaving the station completely unattended when strict regulations discouraged exactly that? And if they were caught by a massive wave, why was no trace of them ever recovered? The Atlantic is unforgiving, but the complete disappearance of all 3 men has continued to puzzle investigators for more than a century. Over time, alternative theories began to emerge. Some suggested that one of the men may have suffered a sudden accident near the cliffs. The other 2 rushed to help. Then a second massive wave swept away all 3 before anyone could react. This version explains why they may have ignored normal lighthouse procedures. Others proposed a far darker possibility. Could there have been a violent argument? Donald McArthur had a reputation for having a strong personality. Some writers speculated that tensions inside the isolated lighthouse may have escalated into violence, but there has never been any physical evidence supporting that idea. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no damaged furniture. Nothing inside the lighthouse suggested a fight had ever taken place. As the years passed, the story became surrounded by folklore. Local legends spoke of mysterious voices carried by the wind. Some claimed supernatural forces protected the islands. Others imagined ghostly figures wandering the cliffs after sunset. Books, television documentaries, and magazine articles added even more dramatic versions of the story. Some claimed the keepers had been abducted. Others suggested secret military experiments, sea monsters, or unexplained paranormal events. These theories captured the public imagination, but none of them have ever been supported by credible historical evidence. The truth is that mysteries often grow larger with every generation. Each retelling adds another layer, another rumor, another unanswered question. Yet behind all the legends were 3 real people: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald McArthur. 3 men who reported for work expecting an ordinary lighthouse rotation. 3 men who never returned home. Their families never received an explanation. Their colleagues never learned what happened during those final hours. Even today, visitors who travel to Eilean Mòr often describe the island as strangely isolated. The cliffs still face the same relentless Atlantic Ocean. The wind still echoes through the empty landscape. And the lighthouse still stands as a reminder of a mystery that refuses to disappear. More than 125 years later, historians continue to study weather records, official reports, and eyewitness accounts, hoping that one overlooked detail might finally reveal the truth. So far, nothing has solved the case. Maybe the official explanation is correct. Maybe an enormous rogue wave erased every trace of the 3 keepers. Or maybe one crucial piece of the story was lost forever in the North Atlantic. We'll probably never know. And perhaps that's exactly why the Eilean Mòr Lighthouse Mystery continues to fascinate people around the world. Because sometimes, history doesn't leave us with answers. It leaves us with questions. Now, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think happened on Eilean Mòr that winter in 1900? Do you believe it was simply the power of nature? Or do you think there's still something about this mystery that has never been explained? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy true unsolved mysteries grounded in real history, don't forget to subscribe. Because some of history's darkest stories are still waiting to be uncovered.